So let's turn to Acts 1 again, and just a couple of verses there, and then for the majority of the time after that, we're going to be in the book of Hebrews, kind of working our way around in several different places. But if you recall, last Sunday, I told you I was going to do 3 sermons on the ascension. So we're going to start with Acts chapter 1, verses 9 through 11, the actual narrative account of the ascension of Jesus bodily and publicly ascending into the heavens and sitting down at the right hand of God the Father. So we get that account in Acts chapter 1, verse 9. And after he said this, he was taken up as they were watching, and a cloud took him out of their sight. And while he was going, they were gazing into heaven, and suddenly 2 men in white clothes stood by them. They said, "Men of Galilee, why do you stand looking up into heaven? This same Jesus, who's been taken from you into heaven, will come in the same way that you've seen him going into heaven." And I emphasized last week that Jesus in his earthly ministry was prophet, priest, and king. And he continues in all of those roles as he sits today at the right hand of the Father. So last Sunday, we focused on Jesus as the prophet, the great prophet, the prophet to whom all the other prophets pointed. But his prophetic ministry continues today through us. By his giving us of his Spirit, we now have the spirit of prophecy. We have the ability to preach the good news, to proclaim God's word, and to spread the gospel to the end of the earth. Today, I want to focus on Jesus as priest. So last week, he is risen, and I said then he rules as prophet. Today, he is risen. He intercedes in heaven. So let's look at Hebrews 7, verses 23, 24, and 25. Now, many have become Levitical priests since they are prevented by death from remaining in office. But because he remains forever, he holds his priesthood permanently. Therefore, he is able to save completely those who come to God through him, since he always lives to intercede for them. So let's begin by talking about the inadequacy of the Old Testament priests. So I want you to understand who the priests were in the Old Testament and how ultimately the work that they did was insufficient and inadequate, and how the priesthood of the Old Testament pointed ahead to a greater priest who was yet to come. First of all, priests were chosen by God to serve God's people. You didn't just decide, I want to be a priest. You didn't, go to Hebrew school and sit down with an advisor and say, I don't know what major to take. I think I'll do priesthood. It didn't work like that. You didn't choose the priesthood in Judaism. God chose you to serve in that role, to serve him and God's people. To begin, he chose Israel to be a holy priesthood. We learn this in Exodus chapter 19, verse 6. Israel would be a royal priesthood. That meant that Israel as a nation served a role of making God known to all the nations, of, in a sense, interceding between God and the nations, to be a stand in between, to point to the true God and to say, this is what it looks like to be his people. But it was not just the nation. God chose individuals to serve in priestly roles. We learn in Exodus 28:1 how God chose Aaron to be the priest and would take the title chief priest or high priest. We also learn that the Levites are the tribe from which the priests will come. You might recall back when we were doing Joshua several months ago, when the allotment of the land happened, one of the tribes did not receive an allotment. It was the Levites, even though they were a tribe. But they were dispersed throughout the other tribes so that there would be the presence of God in all the tribes. There would be mediators between God and the people dispersed throughout the promised land. And God chose the Levites to serve in that role. So priests were chosen by God to serve God and God's people. Also, priests had to be chosen from human beings. Animals could not serve as priests. Angels could not serve as priests. It had to be human beings who were created in the image of God. Now think about why that's important. Animals are not created in the image of God. Angels are not created in the image of God. In creation, only humankind is designated as created in the image of God. So if someone is going to represent God to the people, it has to be someone who is created in the image of God. But that priest also needs to be human in order to represent human beings to God. You are a go-between, a mediator. So to image God to the people, you have to be a human being created in God's image. To image humans to God, you have to be human. And Jesus would certainly fulfill that role, but there were priests in the Old Testament. All human beings are created in God's image, and so they could serve in that priestly mediating role. Priests also acted on behalf of the people. Now, follow what I'm saying here. Priests were chosen by God. Priests were chosen from among the people, and they were chosen to serve or act on behalf of the people. The primary work of the priest was to attend and serve in God's house, whether that be a tabernacle or a temple, and to serve for humanity. That means they would represent human beings before God. They would mediate between God and human beings, and they would intercede and pray to God on behalf of human beings. Priests also made offerings and sacrifices to God. Priests killed animals and brought the blood of those animals to the tabernacle or to the temple and sprinkled it in the appropriate places in order to atone for sin. But they did more than kill animals. They brought flour and oil and grain, and they would burn it as a memorial to God on the altar. Behind all of these actions and behind the function of priests stands one truth, and it's twofold, two parts. First of all, God is holy. The second part of that is human beings are sinful, and thus the problem. How can God embrace human beings? If God is holy and sin is repulsive to God, then how can he embrace human beings who are sinful? That is at the heart of the human condition. Well, in the Old Testament, we begin to see the answer to that by God's calling of priests and through the sacrificial system and the tabernacle and later the temple, where animals would shed their blood, their lives would be taken as a sacrifice so that human beings' sins might be in some way appeased, God's anger towards those sins somehow appeased. It was supposed to be, these offerings, a sweet aroma to God and acceptable to God. It required that something die. And life was presented to God on behalf of those who had violated God's commandments. And priests were the ones appointed to do this work. While God called priests to do it, while the Old Testament celebrates the work of priests, their inadequacy is ever present in the Old Testament. They themselves were stained by sin. You name the priest in the Old Testament, I will show you someone who has sinned against God and who needs a sacrifice for their own sins. You think about those brothers who were the sons of Aaron, Nadab and Abihu in Leviticus chapter 10. They brought an unauthorized offering to God. They tried to use strange fire that was not given by God to consume the sacrifice. And because they did, they were consumed by fire. Eli had two sons, Phinehas and Hophni in 1 Samuel chapters 2 through 4. These two sons of the great priest Eli, when people would bring the animals for sacrifice, they would keep back some of the meat for themselves. They had sexual relations with women who weren't their wives. And as a result of all this, those two brothers died on the same day in battle in 1 Samuel chapter 4. Jeremiah condemns priests for their greed and their ungodliness. Malachi rebukes priests, 1, because they despise God's name. 2, they offered blemished sacrifices. And 3, they were leading others astray. And then ultimately, their sacrifices were inadequate. The blood of bulls and goats. So you have a sinful priest repeatedly going into a man-made structure, whether the tabernacle or the temple, and offering the blood of bulls and goats. That was never going to fully or finally satisfy God's holiness and his anger towards human sinfulness. Already you can see how this whole system is pointing ahead to the greater priest and the greater sacrifice. Next, let's look at Jesus, the greater high priest. This majestic book of Hebrews begins in chapter 1, verses 1 through 3. It's just a beautiful, maybe the most beautiful opening to any book in Scripture. Long ago, God spoke to our ancestors by the prophets at different times and in different ways. In these last days, he has spoken to us by his Son. God has appointed him heir of all things and made the universe through him. The Son is the radiance of God's glory and the exact expression or representation of his nature, sustaining all things by his powerful word. After making purification for sins, he sat down at the right hand of the Majesty on high. Now, this is just the first 3 verses. But that last line, after making purification for sins, he sat down at the right hand of the Majesty on high. Now, you know what that picture of sitting down is. It means the work is done. When this sermon is complete, I'm going to walk down off the stage and I'll sit down for a moment. But I have to get up because there's an 11 o'clock service. And if I didn't show up over there, someone would be walking around looking for me. And if I was over here sitting down, they'd say, "Come on, your work's not finished." This is the time of year where it's time to work in your flower beds, try to get your yard in some kind of shape if you're blessed to have a yard. And boy, that can be several long, hard days out there trying to get things in shape. But isn't it a good feeling when you finished all that work and you come in, you sit down in the air conditioning and you just plop down in your easy chair? And it's like, I'm not getting up all day. That's what I do on Sundays. I do my 3 sermons here. I drive back to Shawnee. My family can attest. I hit my chair, and I'm not going to get up from that chair very much the rest of the day because my work is done, at least for that day. So you say, well, it says here in Hebrews 1:3, he sat down. That means the work is finished. I thought this was a sermon about Jesus' priesthood continuing, how it's ongoing, that there's some eternal nature to it. This looks like it's all complete. Well, look at Hebrews chapter 7, starting at verse 23. I read it at the beginning. Now, many have become Levitical priests since they are prevented by death from remaining in office. But because he remains forever, he holds his priesthood permanently. Therefore, he is able to save completely those who come to God through him, since he always lives to intercede for them. And there is this ongoing work of Jesus as the great priest, the great high priest. His atoning work he completed in his death and his ascending into the heavens and his sprinkling the blood in the heavenly sanctuary. But he continues in his role as priest, interceding for all of us before the Father. And someday he will continue and stand before God and intercede on our behalf and say, he belongs to me. It's the ongoing and eternal work of Jesus as the great priest. So how is he greater than all these others? Well, to begin, his sacrifice was a once for all time sacrifice, and it was perfect. Look at Hebrews chapter 10, turn over just a couple of chapters, starting in verses 1 through 4. Here we see something of the ineffectiveness of the whole Old Testament sacrificial system. I've pointed to how priests were inadequate. They were sinful human beings. They needed sacrifices for themselves. But also we find out the whole system was inadequate. Beginning at 10:1. Since the law has only a shadow of the good things to come, and not the reality itself of those things, it can never perfect the worshipers by the same sacrifices they continually offer year after year. Otherwise, wouldn't they have stopped being offered, since the worshipers, purified once for all, would no longer have any consciousness of sins? But in the sacrifices, there is a reminder of sins year after year. For it is impossible for the blood of bulls and goats to take away sin. The whole passage opens here with the inadequacy of the sacrificial system. The fact that these sacrifices happened day after day after day indicated that each one of those sacrifices was insufficient. So there was a certain inadequacy in this system. It was looking ahead to something greater. And we find that beginning in verses 5 through 12 of Hebrews 10. He starts by quoting in verse 5, Psalm 40, 6 through 8. Therefore, as he was coming into the world, he said, "You did not desire sacrifice and offering, but you prepared a body for me." The writer of Hebrews is going to say that body was the body of Jesus. His was the perfect sacrifice. You did not delight in whole burnt offerings and sin offerings. And then I said, see, it is written about me in the scroll. I have come to do your will, God. Verse 8, after he says above, you did not desire delight in sacrifices and offerings, whole burnt offerings and sin offerings, which are offered according to the law. He then says, see, I have come to do your will. He takes away the first to establish the second. He takes away the Old Testament system in order to establish the perfect. By this will, we have been sanctified through the offering of the body of Jesus Christ once for all time. Every priest stands day by day ministering and offering the same sacrifices time after time, which can never take away sins. But this man, after offering one sacrifice for sins forever, sat down at the right hand of God, and he is now waiting until his enemies are his footstool. It is clear the inadequacies and the insufficiencies of the Old Testament sacrificial system, but now we find the superior, once for all, perfect sacrifice was Jesus. It was not only made by Jesus as priest, he was the perfect sacrifice. He gave himself in a moment where he is both priest and offering. He is a priest who needs no sacrifice for his own sins. He is able to lay down his own life. The truth is, the blood of bulls and goats could never atone for human beings who are created in the image of God. It had to be one of us. Lambs, bulls, goats, not created in the image of God. It had to be one of us, but unlike us, one who was perfect. And in his offering, there was the once and for all time sacrifice of Christ. Remember what the priest did. I mean, think of the Day of Atonement, the most solemn day of the year in Judaism, the Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. And think about what the chief priest, I mean, this is his day. He would start by bathing at the beginning of that day and putting on the white linen priestly garment. Now, this wasn't the fancy priestly garments. This is just a white linen garment. And he would offer a bull. He would sacrifice a bull, and he would take the blood of that bull, splatter it on himself, and then go into the Holy of Holies and sprinkle the blood of that bull 7 times on the covering, the mercy seat, which was the cover of the Ark of the Covenant. You remember the Ark of the Covenant from the book of Joshua? It represented the presence of God. He did this for his own sins and for the sins of his household. And then he selected 2 goats. And he would cast the lot to decide which goat would be the one sacrificed and which one would be the scapegoat. And cast the lot, it points towards this one as the sacrifice. So he would take the life of the goat, sprinkle it on the same altar to appease God's wrath towards the sins of the nation. And then he would take the other goat, place his hands on the goat, and convey the sins of the nation onto the goat and then send it into the wilderness. That goat was called the scapegoat. Leviticus 16 lays all this out, but I think sometimes we forget what this system actually required. In addition to this chief priest once a year, there were 18,000 priests functioning in Israel at the time of Jesus. And you served, if you were a priest, there were 24 orders of priests. You served twice a year. There were about 750 priests per order. I mean, you couldn't lift up a rock without finding a priest. And day after day after day, animals were sacrificed, other offerings were brought, all in an attempt to appease God's wrath towards our human sinfulness. And one can only judge it insufficient and inadequate until the coming of this sacrifice, who through his perfect life, fully God, fully man, God offers the sacrifice himself. But it is a fully human sacrifice. It was heavenly and not earthly. Look at Hebrews 9:23 through 25. Therefore, it was necessary for the copies of the things in the heavens to be purified with these sacrifices, but the heavenly things themselves to be purified with better sacrifices. For Christ did not enter a sanctuary made with human hands, which was only a model of the true one, but into heaven itself, so that he might now appear in the presence of God for us. He did not do this to offer himself many times, as the high priest enters the sanctuary yearly. Otherwise, he would have had to suffer many times from the foundation of the world. Here, I'm less interested in it being a one-time sacrifice than where the actual sprinkling of the blood happens. Jesus, acting as our priest and also as our sacrifice, sheds his own blood, and he enters into the heavenly sanctuary. The tabernacle, the temple, those were just shadows. They were models of the true sanctuary in heaven. And when Jesus goes up into the clouds bodily and publicly, he is ascending to the right hand of God, where he will enter into the heavenly sanctuary and sprinkle his own blood. It was heavenly, not simply earthly. The fact that he, as a fully human being, once he takes upon himself human flesh in the incarnation, he never lays that aside. He continues to this day fully human in a transformed, glorified body. The same body that each of us will receive on the day when God raises us from the dead. He did not cease to be human. So as our great high priest who sits at the right hand of the Father, we have all the benefits of a fully human priest. In fact, Hebrews lays out what that benefit is above all others. In Hebrews 4:14, therefore, since we have a great high priest who's passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold fast to our confession. For we do not have a high priest who's unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who's been tempted in every way as we are, yet without sin. I know I've said this more than once, but the beauty of God taking upon himself human flesh is that God now understands what it is to be fully human. He understands what it is to suffer himself, but also he knows what it is to suffer the loss of people he loved. He knows the appeal of temptation for a human being. There is no experience you can have in this world that Jesus can't say, I know what you're going through. That's our great high priest who continues to be fully human in a glorified body. But he's also sitting at the right hand of God the Father in the full glory of God. And he sits there appealing to his Father on our behalf. It's the beauty of our priest being in heaven and not only on earth. And then his priesthood itself was a greater priesthood. I mean, I've already told you, all the priests in Judaism came from one tribe. You had to be a Levite. If Jesus had in his earthly life decided he wanted to serve as a priest in the temple, he never tried that. He went to the temple, but he just pronounced a curse on it, kicked over some tables. He never tried to get into the Holy of Holies to make some kind of offering there. If he had, they would not have allowed it. He didn't have the right credentials. He was from the tribe of Judah. He couldn't be a priest, not by the law's standards. Well, then what do you do with that? He's not a Levite. How can he be a priest? He was a priest in the order of Melchizedek. Now look at Hebrews chapter 5, where we get introduced to this sort of strange figure from Genesis chapter 14. His name is Melchizedek. We'll pick it up at chapter 5, verse 4 of Hebrews. No one takes this honor on himself, that is, to be a priest. Instead, a person is called by God, just as Aaron was. In the same way, Christ did not exalt himself to become a high priest, but God, who said to him, you are my son, today I have begotten you, or become your father. That's Psalm 2. And it also says in another place, you are a priest forever according to the order of Melchizedek. That's Psalm 110:4. Now, Melchizedek only shows up in Genesis 14 and in Psalm 110:4. That's it, just a few verses. And yet here, he's a priest in the order of Melchizedek. Look at verse 10 of Hebrews 5. And he was declared by God a high priest according to the order of Melchizedek. He will say it again, look at 7:1. For this Melchizedek, king of Salem, priest of God Most High, met Abraham and blessed him as he returned from defeating the 4 kings. That's it. He shows up in like 4 verses in Genesis 14. Abraham had defeated 4 kings who were trying to kill Lot. He comes and God sends out this person named Melchizedek, who's called a priest, to minister to and receive a tithe from Abraham. Now, mind you, this is Genesis 14. There's no nation of Israel. There's no Levites. There's no priests. There's no tabernacle. There's nothing. It's just Abraham and his family. And yet there's this priest named Melchizedek. He was king of Salem. Now, Salem is short for Jerusalem. He's king of Salem, but he's a priest of God. Oh, look at that. He's both king and priest. You couldn't do that in the Levitical line. You couldn't be a king and a priest in Judaism. But Melchizedek was priest and king. He was king of Salem. Salem means peace. His title meant he was king of peace. His name, Melchizedek, means king of righteousness. Melchizedek. I mean, he had it all. This was before there was a tribe of the Levites. And the writer of Hebrews said, well, we know Jesus is not a Levite. He's from the tribe of Judah for other reasons we'll talk about next week. Jesus as king. But he's in the order of Melchizedek, who preceded any of the other priests, even Aaron. His priesthood is greater than all the others. His superiority is evident in every way. And now, what's our responsibility? I mean, we have all these benefits from the fact that he is the great high priest who has ascended to the right hand of the Father in glorified body, fully human, fully God. He represents us to God. He represents God to us. But what is our role? We also learn that the church has been called to be a holy priesthood. You remember last week, Jesus as the prophet gives us his spirit so that we could preach the good news, we could be his prophets in the world. Well, Jesus as the great high priest who eternally serves at the right hand of God as high priest has also given us the role of priesthood. I know you watched all week as a new pope was named in the Catholic Church. And I got to tell you, I was a little bit excited he was an American. I mean, that's my nationalism showing up a little bit, I guess. But I was happy when I heard it was an American pope. But let me just make sure you're aware that there is only one great high priest. And all of us are now priests to God. 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 4 and 5. As you come to him, a living stone, rejected by people, but chosen and honored by God, you yourselves as living stones, a spiritual house, are being built up to be a holy priesthood. It's like we are being built up into a temple of God, and we serve God as a holy priesthood to offer spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. The book of Revelation, when all things are in the process of being summed up, we learn in Revelation 1, 5 and 6, where it introduces Jesus to us. Jesus Christ, the faithful witness, the firstborn from the dead, the ruler of the kings of the earth, to him who loves us, I skipped something. To him who loves us and has set us free from our sins by his blood and made us a kingdom, priests to his God and Father. And then Revelation 5, 8 through 10, when Jesus the Lamb takes the scroll. When he took the scroll, the 4 living creatures and the 24 elders fell down before the Lamb. Each one had a harp and golden bowls filled with incense, which are the prayers of the saints. They sang a new song, and here it is. You are worthy to take the scroll and to open its seals, because you were slaughtered and you purchased people for God by your blood from every tribe and language and people and nation. That's his role as priest and sacrifice. But then verse 10 says, you made them a kingdom and priests to our God, that they will reign on the earth. We offer our lives as a sacrifice to God. It's our priestly role. It could be, for some, they literally lay down their lives as a sacrifice to God. I mean, Jesus modeled that for us. But Paul picks up on it in a different way in Romans chapter 12, verse 1, where he says, therefore, brothers and sisters, in view of the mercies of God, I urge you to present your bodies a living sacrifice. It is our priestly duty. We also serve that priestly role by praying for others. A priest interceded to God on behalf of the people. When you pray for someone, you are serving a priestly role. You are interceding to God on their behalf. We also do it by introducing others to Jesus. Whenever you bring someone to God, you are acting as a mediator of God's salvation. Now, you didn't die for them, you couldn't die for them, but you are bringing them to God. You're introducing them. It's a priestly work. And then finally, by blessing others in all kinds of ways. When you bless others, you are mediating God's blessings to them. And one thing the priest did daily in the temple, whenever the people gathered for prayer, the priest went in just outside the Holy of Holies to the holy place and burned incense and offered prayers for the people. The priest would come out and lift up his hands and pronounce a blessing on the people. We have that blessing in Numbers chapter 6. Now may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord turn his face towards you and give you peace. Amen.